It's been 2 weeks since Easter. Can you believe it? 2 weeks. Are you still eating the chocolate eggs? It's all gone. I still got some. I must have had too much chocolate. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, time flies, but it's 2 weeks since Easter. And so I just thought, as I was reflecting on what we might think about this morning, I thought, Easter is such a joyous time, and we reflect on the victory of the cross, and we reflect on the power of the resurrection. But then sometimes we can just kind of trundle off and wait for Easter to happen next year. And that wasn't the end. The cross and the resurrection wasn't the end of Jesus' time here on this earth. And so I thought this morning we might just have a little bit of a think about certainly an encounter. In the 40 days following the resurrection, Jesus was here for 40 days, and there was he had a number of personal encounters with people in that time. So I thought we would have a bit of a look at one of those this morning. And we love personal encounters with Jesus, don't we? And we've been celebrating them here in this church over the last few weeks. We had the wonderful baptisms with Paul and the whole family, and a real encounter, and Felicity shared a testimony last week. But all over this church, people with stories about personal encounters with Jesus. And we love those. We love those stories because we see the promises of the Almighty God coming to life in real, ordinary people like you and me. And we're reminded of Jesus and the simple message that he really does save lives, and he changes lives. And the Bible's full of those stories too, powerful and true accounts of ordinary people like you and me who were saved and changed by Jesus. So this morning we're going to have a look at one of those accounts, an encounter between Jesus and Peter. Not long after the resurrection. And Peter's story is great because it's one of the most powerful stories of restoration in Jesus that we see in the Bible. It's a wonderful story, and I think you're going to be greatly encouraged this morning by this story. If you've ever felt perhaps like you've let Jesus down, if you've ever felt like your actions have disqualified you from serving in the kingdom, from serving the King, I think this morning you'll be greatly encouraged by this story. So why don't we open our Bibles together at John chapter 21. And I'm going to begin at verse 15. We're halfway through the chapter, and this is Jesus and Peter. And so follow me along. Verse 15, John chapter 21 says, "And after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?' 'Yes, Lord,' replied Peter, 'you know I love you.' 'Then feed my lambs,' Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' 'Yes, Lord,' Peter said, 'you know I love you.' 'Then take care of my sheep,' Jesus said. A third time he asked him, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, 'Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you.' And Jesus said, 'Then feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go.' Jesus said this to let him know what kind of death he would glorify God. Then Jesus told him, 'Follow me.' Peter turned around and saw behind them the disciple Jesus loved, the one who had leaned over to Jesus during the Last Supper and asked, 'Lord, who will betray you?' Peter asked Jesus, 'What about him, Lord?' Jesus replied, 'If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is it to you? As for you, follow me.'" It's a powerful passage. It's a funny kind of passage, isn't it? And so we just read it like that, and it kind of sounds a bit strange. Jesus asking this question 3 times, and Peter answering 3 times, and then all of this stuff about, getting dressed, or someone dressing him in his old age. But we're going to unpack this together this morning, and I think you are going to enjoy and be blessed by the message Jesus has for us in this story. So where are we? Well, we're on the shore of Galilee. That's where we are in this story. Let's just think about where we are in chapter 21 at the start. We didn't read this, but we have 7 of the disciples there beside the Sea of Galilee. We have Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathaniel, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples we don't know. I don't know, they weren't worth naming, says John. So we've got 7 of the disciples there. We know that Jesus, John tells us just a little bit earlier in this chapter that this was the 3rd time Jesus had appeared to the disciples. So we know that Jesus appeared to the disciples on the night of the resurrection. And then we also know from John chapter 21, a little bit earlier, 8 days later he appeared again. And now this is the 3rd time. And so we also know the disciples have moved from Jerusalem to Galilee. That journey by foot might have taken 4 or 5 days. And that lands us, we don't know, but we could guess somewhere around 2 weeks or more after the resurrection. So around about now. This story could well have been happening right about now at this point after Easter. And so here we find the disciples on the shore of Galilee. They've been out fishing, doing what they know and love, and they've been out fishing, and Jesus appears on the shoreline, and they haven't caught anything all night, and Jesus says, "Oi, chuck the net down the right side of the boat," and they do that, and they haul up a whole lot of fish, and then they come into shore, and they find Jesus is already cooking them breakfast. And he's got fish on the charcoal fire, which is just such, I love that image. I just think about what it must have been like in the early hours of the day to come in and find Jesus sitting there cooking some fish over a fire. You can imagine the crackling of the fire and the lapping of the waves on the shore. And just this moment would have been a wonderful moment for the disciples, probably quite a peaceful moment, certainly very joyous to be with Jesus again. And so after breakfast, after they've eaten breakfast, that's where our story begins. Jesus begins to ask Peter a number of questions. And so as we read, Jesus says to him 3 times, Peter, or he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And Peter replies, you know I love you. And Jesus asks the same question twice more. And so, as we said, that might seem like a bit of a funny dialogue in front of the other disciples. But at first glance, it seems a bit funny, but it's not because Peter was hard of hearing. It's not kind of like, Simon, do you love me? What? Simon, what? I can't hear you, Lord. No, it's not like that. Something really powerful is taking place in this conversation, and to understand what it is, we need to go back and just quickly piece together Peter's story. So Peter, let's just understand what brings Peter and Jesus to this moment. So Peter was a leader amongst the disciples, amongst the 12. He was a leader, and we often, every time we see a list of the disciples in the Gospels, we always see Peter's name right at the top of the list. And he was often a spokesman for the group, and he was often the one that stepped forward in pivotal moments, and he was certainly part of Jesus' inner circle with James and John. And he was, importantly, the first disciple to confess Jesus as the Messiah, right? So we need to understand that. So we read that story in Matthew chapter 16, and Jesus is asking, to the disciples, who do people say I am? And they're answering, and then Jesus says to them, well, who do you say I am? And Peter steps forward, and he says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. It's a really important moment, and Jesus replies, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. And he goes on to say, now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock, and upon this rock I will build my church. Whoa. Could you imagine having that moment with Jesus? Could you imagine? He renames him. He gives him a new identity. He says, Peter, you are the rock. He gives him a new purpose. He says, I'm going to build my church. It was a pivotal moment in Peter's story. And then Peter goes on to make some pretty wild declarations we read in the Gospels about his loyalty to Jesus in Matthew 26. Peter says, hey, Lord, even if everybody else leaves you, even if all these other disciples leave you, I'm not going to leave you. He says, I'm not going to leave you. I'll never leave you. And we read in Luke a similar account where Peter says, oh, Lord, I'm ready to go to prison with you, even to die with you. So he pretty publicly declared his loyalty to Jesus. But here's the thing, so Jesus has said, you're the rock, Peter, this is your new identity. Jesus, and Peter has said to Jesus, I'll never leave you, I'll go to prison for you, I'll even die for you. And then just a few hours after making that statement, Jesus was arrested and taken to the high priest and condemned to death by the religious leaders. And Peter is there. Peter is there that night, and he's at the residence of the high priest, and he hears the verdict. He knows the Lord's facing death. And what does he do? Does he bust through the door and say, all right, well, if he goes down, I'm going down with him? No, we read the heartbreaking events in John as Peter gathers with the other servants around another charcoal fire, an interesting little detail that John drops here and again in the story we're looking at. And they ask him if he's one of the disciples. He says, no, I'm not. 3 times they ask him, are you one of the disciples? He says, no, I'm not. And we also read in Matthew the same account. He gives us a bit more details in Matthew chapter 26. Matthew says it was small servant girls asking this question. He wasn't up against the wall by the guards. These were small servant girls asking him, do you know this guy? And Peter says, I didn't even know the man. Didn't even know him. 3 times. And on the 3rd occasion, he says, a curse on me if I'm lying. I don't know the man. 3 times, Peter denies knowing Jesus. A catastrophic failure, you might say, for the man whom Jesus had given a new identity and the task of leading his church. And Jesus knew this was going to happen. He had said to Peter earlier, Peter, you'll deny me 3 times. And when the rooster crows, you will have denied me 3 times. And so on the night that this exchange takes place, Peter denies Jesus 3 times. He hears the rooster crow. And under the weight of his own sin, his own failure, the scriptures tell us all he could do was weep bitterly. And so here in our passage today, we find Peter and the disciples around a charcoal fire again. And maybe there was some tension in the air. Maybe the disciples were thinking, oh, Jesus is here. What's he going to say to you, Peter? Yeah. Hey? Maybe Peter was feeling like, oh, well, you know, I've disqualified from myself from the task Jesus had given me. Maybe Peter might have thought, well, Jesus probably just given up on me. And so Jesus asks him 3 times in the presence of the other disciples, do you understand what's going on here now? Simon, do you love me more than these? He's not talking about the fish or the nets or the boats. He's talking about the other disciples, because Peter had said, I'm not like these guys. I'm never going to leave you. And so Jesus says to him in their presence, Simon, do you love me more than these? And it's clear Peter is pained by this exchange. This isn't a comfortable moment for him. If we look at verse 17, it says Peter was full of sorrow in my translation. In other translations, it says Peter was grieved. Peter was grieved because Peter was being forced to own the wrongs of his past. He was being forced to face up to his actions. And facing up to wrongs in our past, well, it's never easy, is it? It's a painful process. And Jesus doesn't bring up this failure to shame Peter. He brings it up to heal Peter, and that's really important. See, why would Jesus do this in front of the other disciples? Why would Jesus grieve Peter in front of the other disciples? That's a strong word, grieve. Peter's grieving. Okay, so if we have a look at 2 Corinthians 7, chapter 7, verse 10, there's this great verse. Paul writes, for godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief produces death. Okay, catch that. Godly grief. That's what Peter's feeling in this moment. Godly grief. It produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret. See, godly grief is saying, well, okay, I face up to those actions. I was wrong. I made a mistake. Godly grief is saying, you know what, I know I did that and I'm going to own it. Lord, I'm sorry. Right. Worldly grief, on the other hand, is that wasn't my fault. Like, I did it, I know, but you've got to understand, it wasn't my fault, it was their fault. It was because they said this. It was because I was feeling under pressure. That's worldly grief. That's feeling upset in a worldly sense. Jesus is leading Peter to a place of godly grief. And there's great love in the way Jesus does this. He doesn't say, what on earth did you do, Peter? What's wrong with you, Peter? Now do you remember who I am, Peter? He doesn't say anything like that. No, I bet you've learned your lesson now, Peter. Nothing like that. Jesus simply says to Peter, do you love me? It's a powerful moment. Jesus meets Peter in his brokenness, in his failure, with great love. And we should take note of that. Because just like Jesus met Peter in his failure, in his brokenness with love, that's where Jesus meets us, in our brokenness, in our moments of weakness, in those times where we feel like we might have failed. Jesus is always ready to meet us with love. You know, a lot of us carry the weight of some kind of failure, of some kind of brokenness. We don't talk about it, but we do. Things we've done in the past, seasons we might have regretted, times when we might have drifted. And the truth is, in our own way, we've all denied Jesus, just like Peter. We might not have done it so dramatically, but in each of us lies a broken heart that at times wants to distance ourselves from Jesus, preferring to live life on our terms, not his terms. And sometimes we can carry that for a long time. And we might feel like Jesus meets those weaknesses and brokennesses in our life with disappointment. But this passage shows us something different. Jesus doesn't meet our brokenness and failure with rejection. He meets it with love. Because more than anything else, Jesus just wants our love. And he doesn't just meet us in our brokenness with love. He meets us right in the middle of our failures. He doesn't wait for us to come to him. Jesus didn't wait for Peter to come to him. Jesus came to Peter and he met him right where he was at. There's a lovely nuance in the wording in this passage, and I just want to quickly uncover it. We talk about the Koine Greek. The Greek the Bible was written in, and John uses two different words for love here in this passage. We don't see it because we translate them both as love in our modern translations, and the meaning can overlap a little bit, but I think there's a lovely gentle movement in this conversation here, and I just want to pick up on it. So, we talk about there's two words. John uses two different words in this passage for love. One of them is agape, and we talk about that word agape a lot here, don't we? This is the highest form of love. It's unconditional, it's selfless, it's sacrificial. And there's another word used in this exchange, phileo, which is more of a tender, affectionate love, a friendship or a fondness, something you might describe as brotherly love. So this is what's interesting. When Jesus first says, Simon, do you love me? He uses this word agape. Simon, do you love me with the highest form of love? And he says back to him, Lord, I love you. But when he says it, he uses the word phileo. Lord, I love you like a brother. And so Jesus says again, Simon, do you love me? Agape, with the highest form of love, Simon. And again, he can't muster that response. He says, Lord, I love you. He uses the word phileo. I love you like a brother. And so Jesus says the third time, Simon, do you love me? But this time, Jesus uses that same word. He says phileo. He comes right to the point where Peter is in his humility. Peter, who was having this moment of understanding, finally humble in front of Jesus, no longer saying, I'm not like all of these, I'm better than all of them. He's saying, you know what? Okay, you've had time to think about it. I love you like a brother. And so Jesus meets him right there. And the third time Jesus says, well, Simon, do you love me like a brother? And I just think that's a lovely little gentle movement in the conversation, because Jesus, understanding where Peter's at, goes right there to that moment. He says, okay, well, if that's where you're at, that's where I'm going to come to.
Wow, good.
It's the same with us. If we're full of this godly grief, if we're full of honesty, if we're full of humility, Jesus will come right to the spot that we're at. in our weaknesses, in our brokenness, in our moments that we might call failure. Because Jesus isn't looking for you to love him perfectly. He's just looking for you to love him honestly. He's not looking for perfect faith and polished answers and yes, Lord, I'm all of this. He just wants honesty. Jesus meets Peter right in the middle of his brokenness, and he restores him publicly with love, in love. See, no matter how deep we might feel a failure in our lives, a brokenness, the grace of Jesus is even deeper. And we see here restoration. This is the restoration of Peter. It's not about wiping the slate clean and saying, well, let's not talk about what happened there. Jesus is restoring the relationship by asking Peter to face up to his actions in front of the other fellas, but in such a loving way. In such a loving way, he says, do you love me? Do you love me? I tell you what, I don't just... This isn't just something in the text for me. This is something that I feel really personal about. Most of you know my story. Saved by Jesus 3 years ago in the midst of extreme brokenness. But, you know, when I reveal bits of this story, as, you know, the Lord asked me to, here's something I want to reveal to you this morning. So I had grown up, my mother taking me to church, in a family, certainly on my mum's side, with ministers. My grandfather was a minister, his father was a minister, his father was a minister. It's quite the chain. I don't exactly know how far it goes back, but it goes back a long way. And here comes this kid. And I remember somewhere in my youth, I don't know, maybe I was less than 10. And that moment in church, they used to say, you know, do you want to give your life to the Lord? And I gave my life to the Lord. I was less than 10. I'm going to be honest, I don't think I really understood what that meant at that age, but I did it. And then somewhere in my mid-teens, we used to call it deprogramming back then. I think they call it deconstruction now. I went, that's all ridiculous, and I don't believe that. And I went through this, what was quite a lengthy process of kind of removing these bits out of my brain and my character, denying Jesus, denying everything he was. And I spent 30 years... Not just, I used to call myself, I used to say to people, I'm an atheist. I don't believe that garbage. All right? I mean, you can't deny Jesus any more strongly than that. And yet, I was about 45, Mum. And he just came crashing into my life. Amen. And he met me right in the middle of my brokenness. He didn't wait for me to clean up. He didn't wait for me to sort myself out. He didn't wait for me to think, oh, well, maybe I'll just change my mind. Maybe I'll start to live a bit better. He came crashing straight into my brokenness. And he said, here I am, Greg. Do you love me? Do you love me? Didn't expect that. And there he was. And there he was. And so there's this moment of healing. That's what Jesus does. See, we've all got these moments. We've all got these moments. Maybe it's not addiction for you. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's worry. You know, there's all sorts of ways. Maybe it's anger. Maybe it's a relationship breakdown where we've not been as kind as we can to someone else. You know, there's all these moments in life where we, in some sense, kind of deny Jesus. And he's just waiting to step into those moments and say, okay, not how you're going to fix this, not what are you going to do. He's waiting to step into those moments and say, right, do you love me? Do you love me? And let's watch what happens next. So there's this moment of healing and Peter facing his mistakes. And look what Jesus does. He says, as he's asking these questions and Peter's responding, he says, feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. Do you know what that means? The sheep's you and me, the people of God. He's giving Peter a job. He's recommissioning him to the role that he's calling. He's saying, okay, well, if you love me, then feed my sheep. Look after my children. What Jesus does is he recommissions Peter as the rock. And Peter goes on to become one of the early fathers of the church. But Jesus is saying, Peter, well, if you do love me, then look after my people. He doesn't just say, okay, you're forgiven, go and sit up the back. He says, you're forgiven, now I've got a job for you to do. Hey? That's what he does. And we're reading this story with a specific calling about Peter, but that principle stands for us today. I'm going to tell you, that's what Jesus does. Jesus restores, and when he restores you with a purpose. Because he's got a purpose for each and every one of you sitting in this room today. It doesn't matter what you've done in the past. It doesn't matter how badly you think you've failed. Jesus is waiting to restore you with a purpose to serve and love the people he loves. You see, when we enter a personal relationship with Christ, we don't just receive him, we're brought into his people. Jesus comes with a bride, you know? And so we're brought into his people, into his church. And, you know, Jesus told us this in his when he gave us the commandment. And he says in Matthew chapter 22, Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. Okay, got that bit. But then, this is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally as important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus told us that this was our calling. And our personal ministry is an outflow of our love and relationship with Jesus. And so sometimes I think we can forget that Jesus chooses to use flawed people in his service. Sometimes it's easy to think that service in Jesus' kingdom is reserved for the Christians who are more bold, or they've got it all together, or they're more intelligent, or there's something else. Sometimes we might feel disqualified or unworthy, or maybe we feel God couldn't use us after the things we've done. But Peter, his story, he tells us something different. Your past failures and your weaknesses, those moments where you've fallen over, they don't define what Jesus got in your future. Jesus defines your future. They don't define your future. Jesus defines your future. Oh, it's powerful. It's powerful. So, Jesus meets us in our moments of weaknesses with love. Jesus restores us with a purpose. Look what happens next. Verse 18, I tell you the truth, when you were young, you were able to do as you like. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. But when you're old, you'll stretch out your hands and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to let him know what kind of death he would glorify God. It's a heavy passage, and Jesus says, follow me. I'll tell you what that means. When Jesus says, stretch out your hands, he's referring to the way Peter is going to die. Peter was crucified in the end for his service and devotion to the Lord. Tradition has it that he was crucified upside down because he didn't feel worthy of being crucified in the same manner as Jesus. And in our world in 2006, you know, we live in the Western world. There's not much chance that we're going to meet that end, although it still happens in places around the world. But we are called to pick up our cross daily as we follow Jesus. There's a price. The old things we knew, the pleasures of the world, we're going to let them go. Following Jesus isn't a path to worldly comfort. Discipleship is demanding. Feeding his sheep is demanding. Loving each other is demanding. And that's why Jesus says to Peter, he starts with, do you love me? He needs to know that Peter loves him before he gives him this task. Love sustains the call. He has a purpose for you. He has a commission for you right now, this morning in this room. But the Christian life of service isn't easy, right? I don't know what your personal ministry is. Jesus has got a calling just for you. Maybe it's looking after, a sick mum and dad. Maybe it's guiding and helping your children that might be, have difficulties. Whatever it is, there's a personal ministry for you. Whatever it is. But we don't always feel like feeding God's sheep. And that's why love's got to be the foundation. So that when people say, what are you doing? When people say you're crazy, when you have a bad day, when you're trying to service the Lord, when you're trying to serve his people and things go wrong or it's extra stressful, the only thing that's going to sustain you is love for Jesus. And that's what Peter is saying here. That's what will hold you steady. That's what will hold you steady. And lastly, in this passage, I couldn't resist touching on this. There's no use comparing your walk, your calling with someone else's. Okay, let's read this next bit. Peter turned around and saw them behind them, the disciple Jesus loved. That's John, the one who had leaned over to Jesus during the supper and asked, Lord, who will betray you? And Peter says to Jesus, well, what about him, Lord? What about him? He's just been restored and he's been given this almighty task. He's to feed my sheep. He's been told, well, you know what? You're going to have to give everything to serve me. And so what does Peter do? He looks at the other bloke and says, well, what about him? What about him? Dear, oh dear, I love this. This is because these are real people like you and me, 2,000 years ago. Real people just like you and me. They have the same messiness about them. And Jesus responds, what is that to you? You just follow me. You see, Jesus calls each of us to turn from our brokenness, to turn to him, to receive the forgiveness from him, to follow him. And as he restores us, he gives each of us a purpose, but he assigns different gifts and graces to all of us, serving in his kingdom. And we're not to be concerned with what Jesus has called anyone else to do. We're called to faithfulness, not comparison. All right? Comparison is the thief of your joy and your calling, I can tell you that. Your walk with Christ is a custom-fit journey, right? We waste time looking sideways. Oh, how come they've got an easier lot than I do? How come I've got to do all of this and they don't have to? That Jesus says, don't you worry about that. I've got a calling for that person and I've got a different calling for you. And his answer is simple. You just follow me. You follow me. That's what Jesus says. You know, sometimes it can be useful to reflect on how other people are living out their calling, sure. But it's very easy to move from constructive to crippling. And instead of following Jesus with freedom and joy, our service can become frustrated by feelings of insecurity or frustration or those sort of things. That's why we keep our eyes on Jesus. That's why we don't worry about somebody else's call. We worry about our call. Jesus says, love me, love my people, and follow me. It's the story of Peter's restoration. It's an amazing story. It's a funny little passage when we first read it, but an amazing story. Because just like Peter, Jesus is ready to meet you in your brokenness, in your moments of failure. And just like Peter, Jesus is ready to meet you with love. And just like Peter, Jesus is ready to meet you right where you are. He says, do you love me? Because love for Jesus is what sustains us in our calling. Your calling, different to my calling, but you've got a calling. We serve a God who isn't shocked by our failures, who isn't finished with our stories, who calls us by name into a life of purpose. So it doesn't matter what you've done, whether you think you've failed. Jesus is ready to meet you right where you're at this morning. He forgives and he restores, and in his restoration is a recommissioning. He's just waiting. He's just waiting for you to say, I love you, Lord, so he can say to you, well, this is what I want you to do. And I don't know, maybe that is you this morning. Maybe you're carrying some failure or some shame or some brokenness. Maybe you feel disqualified because of something that's in your past. Maybe Jesus is calling you and you're not ready quite yet to step in and have that conversation with him. But just know that in our brokenness is the very point, it's the very place where Jesus begins restoring us. Jesus didn't ask Peter, can you fix yourself? Can you prove yourself? Are you going to do better? When are you going to clean yourself up? He didn't say any of those things. He just simply said, Simon, do you love me? And that's the same question he asks of us every day, and the same question he's asking here this morning. It doesn't matter if you got it wrong yesterday. It doesn't matter if you got it wrong this morning. Doesn't matter. Jesus is saying, but do you love me? Because if you love me, I've got a job for you to do. And it's a job that only you can do. He said, you don't need to worry about what they're doing. Just love me and follow me.